Hello, and welcome to this mini podcast series, When Relationships Go Wrong, with Hoot Singles and LICC. My name is Hattie Webb. I'm the founder of Hoot Singles, my much-loved side hustle where I run Christian singles nights to enable singles to meet, mingle and have fun. And I'm joined by the lovely Sophie Sanders, who is the marketing and communications lead at LICC. I've had the joy of getting to know her through this collaboration, and she's honestly amazing. Her friends call her the Christian Bridget Jones, and she's currently, very excitingly, writing a book about relationships, which you'll get a little taster of in this 4-part blog series Sophie has written alongside this podcast, covering the challenges of singleness and dating. They're only short, so we're looking forward to chatting them through in a bit more depth. So go and check out the blog post on the LICC website, but don't worry if you don't manage to read any of them, you can still listen and follow along. I know so many of you are going to feel deeply encouraged and seen by Sophie's story and vulnerability. Thank you so much for joining me, Sophie, and without further ado, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to part 2 of When Relationships Go Wrong with Hoot Singles and LICC. This episode is all about the destructive daters. Gosh, this is going to be an interesting one. Let's dive in. So the Bible passage you focused on, Sophie, for this episode or this part is Psalm chapter 5 verses 8 to 10. And the Psalms are just so fitting for this topic because they're so raw and honest. David says, not a word from their mouth can be trusted. Their heart is filled with malice. And Sophie, I'm actually just going to read some of your reflections on the blog as this just spoke to me so much. Honestly, the relief when I read your words when I first read this, and I just know it will others. For those of you that haven't read the blog post yet, I'd just love to read it out to you. Perhaps you suffered the effects of cheating or duplicity in a relationship. You started chatting with someone on a Christian dating app, and for the first few weeks, everything seems rosy. But before long, you realise they're just after casual sex, or you'd been dating someone for several months, but your relationship comes crashing down when you see a picture of them kissing your best friend on Instagram. Take heart because these individuals are accountable to God, and the psalmist identifies their rebellion is ultimately against him. And as someone myself who has been cheated on during a long-term relationship, I know the pain that comes with destructive daters, and not even the big stuff or the seemingly small things that build up, being constantly ghosted, breadcrumbed, love-bombed, and all the other dating terminology. And of course, we know that God is the ultimate judge and we can forgive because he has forgiven us. But I wonder if you can speak to the more kind of practical side of moving on from some of these experiences. What has helped you?
First of all, Hattie, it really breaks my heart to hear that you've gone through some really horrible dating experiences yourself. I think so often in the Christian world, we don't talk about these things, and it's not a healthy way to deal with it. And so I think the first thing that I would say on a really practical note is to talk about your dating experiences, your disappointments, your disasters, not just your joys. And I think kind of recognizing that actually very few people marry the first person they date. And that's okay, because actually going on a date, going for a coffee, going for a drink, isn't getting engaged to someone. And I think if dating can be done well, which I know we'll get onto later, then actually it doesn't need to be that first person you have any kind of conversation with of the other sex becomes your spouse. But then I think in terms of moving on after really hurtful experiences, and thank you for sharing some of your story. I'll kind of skim over a few of the most hurtful moments from my dating history, and then kind of speak a little bit about what I found helpful. I've only ever been in one relationship, and it wasn't very long at all. It was only a couple of months, but the guy that I was dating was very emotionally manipulative, and actually ended up renouncing his faith. And so I broke up with him. This was a complete shock to me. And I think I felt very hurt because he had been very intentional from the outset, and in many ways had done exactly what I perceived to be right in a Christian relationship, kind of setting the end goal as marriage, and kind of always being focused, having very clear physical boundaries, all of those sorts of things. And to be honest, when that relationship ended, I felt really humiliated because I was the first of my friends for something to end. And I didn't really know how to deal with that. And I think what I would say to my younger self, that was 21-year-old Sophie, is that it's okay to mourn the loss of a dream.
Yeah.
Actually, that is a form of grief. Grief isn't just losing somebody as in somebody dying, but it can be the death of a dream. And so just as you wouldn't expect to kind of snap out of it if a close relative dies, actually a broken relationship is something to grieve. It's something to mourn. And it's something to recognise that when God sees the brokenness that's led to the breakdown of a relationship, he grieves and he mourns too. Because actually that's not how this world was meant to be. God has created us to be individuals that exist in relationships, in community. We are relational beings. And all the things that lead to a breakdown of a relationship, whether that be duplicity or cheating or unkind words, none of that brings glory to his name. None of that pleases him. And so he's with you in that. But then I think there's also something to be said about not wallowing. My mum talks a lot about the miry pit, which is a biblical reference from the Psalms. And sometimes she'll say to me, she'll call me out. She'll say, Sophs, I think you're in the miry pit right now and you need to get yourself
amazing.
out.
We love mums.
Oh, we love mums. And she's actually drawn it out for me before when I was in quite a miry pit phase of life with a ladder coming out of the pit. You know, there is a way out. And actually, we don't need to dwell in the sadness of a broken relationship forever. It's not something, you know, we don't need to be wearing black and mourning what could have been. Actually, there's a healing process. Often breakups can be traumatic. They have an imprint on the body, but there is a way forward. There is a way forward. We trust in a God who heals, in a God who restores. And actually, he can make all broken things new. There's that beautiful type of Japanese art where they put broken pieces back together with gold. And I think having that image for yourself, yeah, you might have been shattered from this relationship, but God is making something beautiful out of it. I think that hope-filled grief is kind of the way that I've learnt to deal with some sad relationship ends or things that could have been that didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, and actually that's just such a beautiful image that you've painted there. And I love how you spoke to both the grief, but actually the not wallowing in it and not staying there. And actually that just speaks to my experience so much as well, because the reality is, you know, I came out of a long-term relationship where I thought we were going to get married and have children. So actually a lot of the grief, even of short-term things, and actually allow yourself to grieve, you know, short-term things as well, is that dream, is what could have been, you know, I could have gotten married to this person or this thing could have gone really well and it hasn't turned out the way I expected. So let yourself grieve. And actually a big part of that process for me was therapy. And I'd say that has actually been integral to my dating life. And actually having someone, you know, if you are in a position where you can have therapy, obviously it's not accessible to everyone, or if you can have some sort of mentorship to guide you through dating and relationships, for me especially has been invaluable, because it's also that sense check of actually, you know, is this okay? Like, what do you think about this? But actually just venting as well. And that was part of the grieving process for me. And my therapist was incredible at kind of allowing that and being like, just let it out in a healthy way, cry as much as you need to cry, because otherwise it might come out in unhealthy ways, you know, in the future, in a future relationship, or just more generally. So that was a really important part of the process for me. It's just letting it out and telling myself, actually, that's okay. God is with me. He hears my cries. My tears are liquid prayers. But then on the flip side, when you were saying about the wallowy pit, I thought of the saying, don't look back, and how that's linked to Lot's wife. You know, Lot's wife looked back and then she was turned to stone, I think. And I actually just read a Christine Kane book, which is all about that. And she's such an advocate for don't keep yourself in the past. You know, God has a future for you. He can really wipe your slate clean and you don't have to be defined by your past and the things you've experienced. And so I just love how you link both of those things together as well. Sophie, you are a hopeless romantic. Despite the destruction of dating, both of us can't help but be hopeless romantics. We're both Pride and Prejudice fans. Already mentioned it. I actually watched a bit of Jane Austen the other day, Persuasion, love it. Cried my eyes out at the end. It's so romantic. So having so many knockbacks, I mean, we both had, and pain in dating life, relationships. How do you remain hopeful of romance? Because there'll be people listening to this, it's like, kind of what is the point? We'll get onto that a bit more with marriage later, but how do you remain hopeful, keep dating, go on the other date, re-download the app again, slide into someone's DMs again? How do you find that hope?
Oh, it's such a good question. And I think it's a really hard balance to strike, to be someone that loves love and wants to celebrate love, like we trust in a God who is love. And one of those gifts to us is relationships. And one of those types of relationships is romantic relationships. And so it's not a wrong desire. But at the same time, from my experience, relationships and dating have not been a happy place or a happy time. And I'll be honest, I'm not always great at keeping it in perspective. It's something I definitely really struggle with and I have to kind of choose to do. It doesn't come naturally or instinctively. But I think I've also made a really active choice not to distance myself from love or to sort of become this sort of like kind of Scrooge-like figure who's always like, well, that's going to go wrong. That's going to end in divorce, there's no hope. Actually, where I see loving relationships, celebrating them, and being mad about love. Bridget Jones's Diary, the fourth one is coming out this month, and called Mad About the Boy. And actually, I want to be mad about love, because actually love is a life-giving, life-transforming gift from God. And actually, when I see my friends get married, I want to be happy for them, and I want to be able to celebrate that for others, even if I don't experience romantic love. God has gifted me with a wonderful family and with wonderful friends who I love to pieces. And actually, I think again, we've talked about this before, but just broadening out what we understand love to be. It's not only sexual desire. It's not only between a husband and a wife. It can be other things. And so I can be a hopeless romantic.
Yeah.
Even in a state of perpetual singleness, and with a dating history that I kind of wish I could just erase and never think about again.
Yeah, and I think just speaking to that as well, I always used to say to myself, do I want to be living from a scarcity mindset? Do I want the fact that there's way more women in the church than men, or the fact that people are ghosting left, right and centre to be the way that I'm approaching dating or my life more generally? Or do I want to approach it from a place of abundance? Because God is a God of abundance, and he can do so much more than we could even imagine or fathom. Sometimes if we actually just let him and stop holding on to things maybe so tightly. And actually, I think going back to hope, we should always remember Song of Songs, the fact that that is included in the Bible for a reason. It is so romantic, and it speaks to intense desire and actually the joy of physical attraction too. And it really highlights both that mystery and power of romantic love. And there's a reason that that's been included. As you said already, God loves that side of us also, and the fact that we do have those desires on our heart, and it's something that we can bring to him and dream about and bring our dreams to him. But it's a hard tension.
It is a hard tension, but I think even just zooming out a little bit more, you have Song of Songs that is this beautiful love poem. But when you zoom out, the Bible as a whole, the biblical narrative, it's a love story.
Yeah.
Like actually, I can be a hopeless romantic because I believe in a God who has pursued me, who loves me so much that he came after me. Even when I ran from him, he came after me. And I think when you frame love stories here on earth in that as little micro pictures of that bigger love story, kind of think, how can you be a Christian and not be a hopeless romantic? Because actually we are all part of that huge, big, amazing, perfect love story that God has written for us and for our lives and for his world.
I love that so much.
This series is in collaboration with SALT. I love it when podcasters say that they wouldn't endorse something that they don't use. And so, confession viewer / listener, I am on SALT, and I've had such a positive experience of the dating app. I love the different questions you get to answer, the different badges, and I've loved some of the people I've met through it. I went for a date last week with someone that I met on SALT, and it's not gone anywhere, but I would say that it was such a good model of how Christian dating can be done. There was kindness, there was clarity, there was curiosity, there was a real sense in which we were seeing each other as humans made in the image of our loving relational Father. And so I'm excited to keep swiping right and hopefully meeting someone for me, and I would really encourage you to try it too.
And just switching it round, because we spoke about this before, and actually it's very easy to say, destructive daters, but actually none of us are immune from this. We've all been destructive daters at times. None of us are perfect, and we're the first to admit that as well. We've learnt a lot over the years. And actually, I thought, why not just ask each other a bit more about this and actually show some of our vulnerability of when we've been destructive daters, how we've learned from that.
Oh, I absolutely love this question. I think so often there's a kind of holier than thou mindset in the church, and no one wants to admit any way in which they contributed to the breakdown of a relationship. And the reality is there are normally two sides to the story.
Yeah.
Not necessarily two equal sides. It's not a competition to see which percentage of the breakup is for who. But I think as I reflect on dates I've been on, relationships I've been in, I think a lot about emotional intimacy. So I referred in the last episode to the fact that I got 0 on physical affection in the love languages test, but actually a huge, huge way in which I both express and receive love is words of affirmation. So we're talking really here about emotional intimacy, about being very honest and vulnerable, sharing a lot of my emotions, positive and negative, sharing very, very deep parts of myself. I think sometimes I'm prone to do that too quickly. And so I escalate a relationship or a budding relationship to be something it's not yet.
Yeah.
In the kind of language of the Bible, I'm awakening love before it's time. And I was having a conversation with a male colleague at work about this, actually. And he was like, emotional intimacy, what's that? And I was like, I know that I have to really set myself boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, when I first see someone, like, what is appropriate to share for the relationship we have at this point?
Yeah.
How is that going to kind of escalate things too quickly? And I was, kind of trying to liken it to sort of physical boundaries. You might think, okay, well, on a first date, I wouldn't do X, Y, or Z. Actually, that is not proportionate to what I have. When I've been dating someone for 2 months, maybe that would still be too much. Or, that's a line I wouldn't want to cross. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that fosters intimacy in an appropriate and God-honouring way. And I think I need to be better at fostering and creating and keeping to emotional boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think for lots of guys, that's quite an abstract concept because their minds go physical, emotional. Whereas I think most girls go emotional, physical.
That's so true.
And I think when we were batting this around, I think both of us had that kind of aha moment where we were like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You go that way first and what you think this way first.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't think I've necessarily realised how unhelpful my tendency to be vulnerable and very open with everyone I meet can sometimes actually awaken love, awaken intimacy that's out of proportion before it's time.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting point because we tend to talk about physical boundaries a lot, especially in the Christian space, don't we? But less so about emotional boundaries, actually. And also, you've mentioned a couple of times now love languages. And for anybody listening who hasn't done their love language test, I would highly recommend that you do so. Just in general, it's been a game changer for me in my dating life and navigating relationships as well. But actually, that's just so self-aware of you. And it's amazing how you've learned from that as well. And actually, dating enables us to learn and enables us to grow. And that's just incredible in of itself, even if it's not leading to marriage. I don't think that the end goal for it to be worthwhile or valuable is for it to end in marriage. We can learn so much, we can grow, we can encourage others in what we're learning as well. And I've learned so much about myself through dating, through dates where it's gone wrong and where I've been destructive. I mean, I would tend to probably force things a little bit that now looking back, I'm like, they weren't meant to be, but I definitely had a tendency to hold on to things too tightly. And even when a guy like wasn't replying to me in days, I would really try and justify why he was my future husband, even though we've only been on one date, and try and really force those things. And actually, I guess I had to learn the hard way, and hindsight's a beautiful thing. You can look back and be like, gosh, Hattie, like, of course, he wasn't putting in the effort that you deserve or should expect from someone that you might potentially be in a relationship with. So I think that's something that I definitely had to learn, is actually let go. And sometimes that meant actually physically in worship, letting go. Like, I shouldn't have to force these things to happen. My worth is in Jesus, and that means that my worth is coming from a higher place than having to force someone to be with me or to love me or to want to be in a relationship with me. So we've both, huge learning curves. And then just looking again to that question that you include in each of your blog posts, and the one that you included in this one was, how will you fill your heart with Jesus's truth and beauty this week?
Oh, I love thinking about how I can encounter Jesus in my week. This is not something that was very natural to me kind of growing up, but I actually brought a verse along just to share here, and that is Psalm 19 verse 1, and it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands." And I think sometimes when I am by myself and I'm out in nature, to be honest, it can be any season and any weather. It can be tipping it down with rain. It can be a beautiful sunset, a beautiful sunrise. It can be really thick frost. But actually realising that these beautiful moments of God's creation are just a glimmer of who he is. And actually kind of just meditating upon that. So this week, I've resolved to get myself out solo for a walk or a run or a cycle, and just to enjoy God's good creation. And as I experience something of the majesty of the elements and the beauty of the scenes I see around me, to actually just thank God for his beauty and his truth, and to ask that I would look to see the beauty in all the humans that I interact with, the God-given individuality, that they are crafted in his image uniquely. And that actually, particularly as I think about dating, that as I begin that journey with someone, as I meet someone, as I go for a drink with someone, that what I'll be wanting to see in them is the beauty of Christ manifest in an embodied soul. So yeah, that's what I'll be doing this week, and I can't wait.
That sounds amazing, and actually that links really well. If I was going to give one tip on dating in general, it would actually be looking at Philippians 2 verses 3 and 4. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. And I think that speaks to what you just said, actually, in dating. Let's think about, or whoever we interact with, let's think about how we can leave that person better off than we found them, regardless of what happens, whether it ends, whether we go on one date, whether we date for months and then it ends. How can you leave this person better off than you found them? And
oh man,
thank you, Sophie, for talking to me about dating. We could have talked about it for hours and hours, but we're gonna have to stop.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hattie.